Do I start now? Oh, okay. Sorry, my bad. Hello and welcome to taking it late. Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties episode 33. Yeah, that's right. We're
Yes.
33 episodes in this year. Um, Today I have Lee joining me from WA
G'day.
and Zeev joining me from Victoria. And I,
Oh,
of course, am Vickers, who is currently faceless, as you can see, because, well, I'm just feeling a little bit shy today. But we're gonna we're gonna talk about, basically, uh, if you're feeling shy and you don't want to say the national anthem, should you be allowed to abscond from that? So there was this article in the news about how a particular Muslim lobby group wants to stop the forced assimilation of Muslim students by allowing them to abstain from singing the Australian national anthem. And I know there are a lot of nationalistic feels about that. I don't know if there are any particular nationalistic type of people on the show, but I'm sure we can get someone covering that, right?
I think we can probably categorically state that we're all pretty anti-nationalist.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's still worth talking about. But like,
yeah, guys.
it's
I mean, look, this is so important to our national values. We have an anthem because it inspires unity and shared values in our society, and I'm really having trouble choking down the bullshit.
Yeah, I was about to say if you're gonna present the argument, can you do it with less sark?
Well, look, presented with sarc or not, this is the argument, isn't it? I mean,
It is, and look, to some degree, I would agree with it if it was actually unifying. So one of the things is there are certain groups already granted exemptions. So for example, take out voting, right? People would say voting is a national institution, everybody should be part of it, etc. That's why it's made compulsory. I profoundly disagree with that. But we force it on everyone with the exception of certain religious groups,
mm,
namely the Jehovah's Witnesses. So we already allow groups to abscond from it. Nobody cries if the Aboriginals, for example, and there are some Aboriginals who don't want to sing the Australian national anthem because they feel like this was an invasion and all of that.
mm.
Nobody cries about that. It's just when Muslims come into the mix, then all of a sudden it's a
well,
bit of an
that's
issue. It's
because
like, let's
JWs are
trample
white
over.
and Muslims are brown, Vickers. You got to get it right.
Yeah, I
Um,
forgot. I forgot my color filter.
yeah, I mean, I think there's not like I don't feel any great sense of overwhelming pride whenever I sing the national anthem. Like it's okay, it's an okay anthem. All anthems are kind of lame to begin with, but I don't sort of, I guess I don't share the nationalist feeling about it. But I don't think it's unreasonable to actually think that it is a unifying thing. In along with a lot of other things that like respect for the flag and all this other stuff. Yeah,
Sure,
okay,
it
that's fair
unifies
enough.
the
That's
entire
that's it's
country.
not like a totally insane position to have. Like I can respect the fact that people think that. I
Uh,
guess where I want to differ is when they say, "Well, if you don't, therefore you are a dangerous subversive element." And I think, like, firstly, primarily, I think they misunderstand what kind of about priorities and things. I mean, essentially, what these students in Victoria were doing, they're saying our obligation to our religion is more important than any notion that others have about obligation to nation. Like, I mean, let's be straight here. Like, it's not like these kids were like communists subverting democracy by leaving the national anthem. It's they're religious people who stepped out. It's not that big a deal. It's only a big deal because nationalists think it's a big deal and they get upset. Um, but also, I think the nationalists fail to understand that, well, one of the things that makes Australia great is religious tolerance. There's lots of religion, like pretty much any person who has some sort of religious affiliation puts it above the country. Like, unless your god is the state or is subservient to the state.
Well, this is the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Their God is the state.
Well, yes, I guess that's a good point. And I mean, something I raised with a Nasho I was debating this on Facebook. I said, look, you're essentially saying that because it's Maharam, is the religious festival that these kids were abstaining from the national anthem. It's like you're trying to tell these kids who have a 1400-year-old tradition to put that second to a 30-year-old national anthem. And I think when you put it like that, you sort of say, well, I don't know how serious you can
Well,
really be about freedom and things like that if that's going to be your attitude.
I know what you mean, but it sounds
For-
strange to say that kids have a 1400-year-old tradition.
But they do.
That part funny as well. But my sort of issue on this is, it only seems to be the religious freedoms of Muslims we want to trample over.
It's true, yeah.
Like you talk about trampling over the religious freedoms of Jews, all of a sudden people are going to get upset. People are going to make obvious inclinations to point out the Nazis because, and I think they'd be right in that case to point that out. You talk about Christians, and then there's this entire thing about the war on Christmas or anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think because it's kind of the mode or something right now to take the piss out of Muslims, people think it's kind of okay to say, oh yeah, those religious freedoms we afford them, like, being able to observe a holiday which they have, well, a holy day that they have, where they can't actually sing or something. They can't sing or dance. I'm just like, well, so much for the religious tolerance you claim to, support.
I think part of the issue is just a general fear of extremist Islam, which is.
But that's separate to this issue, right? This isn't really an example of creeping.
That's what I'm saying. It's carried over into just a hysteria about every aspect of Muslim practices and beliefs. And
so this is like the Q Society and their whole, we must ban halal because it's a secret tax.
Exactly. That's basically it. And I think it's just a product of that unfortunate general fear, which, look...
I do want to say something, though. I will agree that the national anthem is sort of unifying, because it does unify all of us into a collective sense of meh. I'm not kidding you. Seriously, there is something utterly uninspiring about our national anthem. It might be because we don't really know most people don't really know the words out of the most innocuous verse out of it. Let's face it.
Apathetic about our national anthem.
Yeah, it's not like these nationals are going to have a go at footy players who you see obviously not singing the anthem when the anthem's being played at the start of the game. I mean, I guess, like, from the nationalist perspective, it is kind of like Muslims are a suspect class. That is, they need to demonstrate their obvious devotion to Australia, otherwise they're automatically not... they don't really support the country. I guess that's kind of their... Like, and they wouldn't say that about other people. Like, they wouldn't say that about Hindus or Buddhists or whatever. Though I'm sure if you ask them if they think Muslims are a suspect class, they'd probably say no. That's just because they don't necessarily understand their own position. But, I mean, I think this kind of taps into a similar sort of attitude. Like what we talked about, I think, last week, where there's a difference between freedom of speech and then toleration. And really, this isn't we're not talking about a freedom of speech issue. Like, we're talking about a bunch of people who think somebody should sing something. At this stage, at least, the government isn't forcing it to. Maybe they think the government should. But there's still a lack of the Enlightenment values that we talked about. That is, valuing the fact that people are different. And people can actually express their beliefs in different ways. And that's okay. It doesn't make them traitors. It doesn't make them dangerous.
It's a violation of it's a complete violation of the notion of consent, actually, when you get down to it. If you want to force someone to sing something, and obviously we should be uncomfortable with that because libertarians are huge fans of consent. Sorry, what?
You really can't force people to be free. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
We're going to compel you to share our tolerant values. It's just...
Is it really tolerant values if you compel people?
Well, that's why I'm saying it that way. Exactly. It's intolerant.
Yeah.
And it's a contradiction in terms. The whole point of the success of, tolerance is that it teaches people to be tolerant. But you can't force people to be tolerant.
Okay.
And in fact, I mean, the whole definition of tolerance is getting along with people who you don't like. So it's like it's not I guess saying, well, nationals should just let go of their dislike of brown Muslims and all of a sudden embrace the greatness of Islam. It really is a case of they probably will continue to dislike them for whatever reason, but you just get along with them anyway. You just, let them live their lives. They let you live your life, and never the twain shall meet, if that's what you want to do. I guess that's what sort of... I guess that's what different from, say, the progressive sorts of values, which is really about acceptance. Like, they want everybody to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and get along. Well, that's not going to happen. Like,
So to play devil's advocate here, one of the things the nationalists would bring up is the famous Karl Popperian argument. You shouldn't be tolerant of intolerance, and they'd be making the case that Islam is as a socio-political ideology, is quite intolerant of Western liberal values.
Well, I guess this is again when we come down to sort of individualism versus collectivism, because some Islamic ideologies are hostile to Western values. Some aren't. If you go to Turkey, which has democracy and less freedom of the press these days, but there are some Muslim countries that have broadly kind of democratic society, and you're going to have a wide diversity of opinion. You're going to find people who think that like liberal values should be outlawed because they're against Islam, and then you have people who believe, in their own minds, convinced they're Muslims and think that it's okay with democracy and all that sort of thing. So it's, I guess in the case of the nationalists, they're just saying, well, all Muslims are the same.
Yes.
Well, but they're not. They're different. I mean, every single, if you talk to 1,000 Muslims, you're going to have 1,000 different opinions.
Indeed. And the thing is that, if we apply that logic to other migrant groups, you start asking yourself all sorts of questions that people aren't asking themselves at the moment, and which aren't necessarily, consistent. We could say, well, at the moment, the only ideology coming from China is communism. Ergo, every Chinese person arriving here is a presumed communist, or communist agent, or communist infiltrator. Now,
so what I was actually going to say is, sorry, I'm going to come at this from a different point. I know I'm playing both sides of the field on this one. Is that it kind of completely ignores that people who are fleeing those situations kind of want to get away from that.
Exactly.
Like, these are the people most likely to adhere to Western liberal values because they're the ones fleeing the very system that they're talking about.
Indeed.
Maybe. I guess that, like, I really agree with you, but I think that's not necessarily always the case. Like, if you go to Lakemba and you start interviewing people about the value of democracy, you're gonna. All those guys are going to the
but the thing is,
Terzib Al or whatever. Those crazy anti-democracy. Those people are anti-democratic. So it's not just.
But they're not first generation. Sorry, but they're like second generation immigrants, right? They're
Well,
the
maybe.
of immigrants.
I don't think it's totally out of the realm of possibility to want to leave a country because the economic circumstances are absolute rubbish, and still not like Western democracy.
Oh yeah, no.
I broadly agree with you, but I think it's not.
Yeah, it's not universally true.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we're arguing that it's universally true.
I guess so.
There's no dispute.
But just to go to the communist thing. If you interviewed members of the Communist Party in China, I doubt you'd find that many communists. I just thought I'd bring that up because it's. I guess it's easy to categorize people.
North Korea, Cuba, somewhere more strongly communist in policy and ideology, and those observations would hold true. In North Korea, people are taught to believe that the Kims are akin to gods.
Yeah.
So
not.
Pardon?
There's no evidence to say that they're not. Just on prima facie value, say the North Korean government's probably on the ball there.
Fair point.
Exactly.
Confirmed on this podcast. The Kims are gods.
Adoptive reasoning, that is being adopted for Muslims, then obviously we shouldn't be letting in North Koreans who flee because they are a danger. They could genuinely believe that, Kim Jong-un is a god.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. It's reasoning that, once you look at it, it means basically that people can't integrate here and can't discard ludicrous values once they're exposed, or at least ludicrous aspects of their belief system once it is exposed. And that's, the thing is, that's by and large the history of our society. that people have come here and basically accepted tolerant values. That's what's happened. Because we live in a tolerant society. Now, I'm not saying it's inevitable in every case. I'm just saying, by and large, that holds true. And I don't think there's any reason to think that it won't hold true in future. Anyway.
Or even just like, we're going to move on in a sec, but even just the notion that you can live alongside people who have bad ideas. I mean, that's ultimately what this is about. It's that some conservatives, nationalist conservatives, don't like the ideas that people have, and they want to get rid of those people. Where I think the libertarian position is, well, no, you don't have to. You can just live alongside of them. They can have their bad ideas. You can have your good ideas. And that's life. We can get along. That's fine. You can trade. You can still benefit each other, even if you have terrible ideas.
Exactly.
So, and certainly international trade bears that out. We can get along with the Chinese, even though they're run by a horrifying dictatorship, because, that's how the world works. You can get along with people who have bad ideas.
And this is the thing. As you do trade and interact in society, you actually bring down those barriers. And you meet people you would never otherwise meet from foreign places, and you can really see how they think to themselves, wow, I've never met a Russian before, I've never met a Jew before, or something. And it's like you really see in how they're assimilating that experience in their own minds, particularly when you're dealing with new migrants and so on, because a lot of them haven't. And they come away better for it, I hope, anyway. Unless I'm a complete arsehole.
Okay, so speaking of Russians, let's talk about the bombing in Syria. So it turns out the ideas of ISIS and the government of Syria just can't seem to get along. So after months and months of US, helping out the rebels, I know you can't see my rabbit ears there, but it's quite clear that a lot of those rebel factions are actually ISIS. So embarrassing. The US has been basically helping ISIS. On the other side, Russia's gotten involved, and now they've started bombing the crap out of them. I know we held off on this topic for a couple of weeks because we wanted to see how it panned out. But now it looks like they're having minor success over there. It's the ISIS has been forced back to Raqqa and back into Iraq. They're really panicking out of Syria. What do you reckon this bodes for the United States and their sphere of influence in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, they're responding by sending ground forces that the Parliament just announced over the weekend. I think it was. They're going to start sending special forces. So obviously, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just one-upmanship. I mean, the reality is, and I think the Atlantic had a really good article on this, where basically said no one likes ISIS. Everybody hates ISIS. Other Muslims hate ISIS. Other governments hate ISIS. ISIS has not got a single friend in the entire world, including other jihadist groups. So, I mean, it's inevitable that pretty much everybody who has a stake in Syria, and I guess Iraq as well, and probably Turkey for that matter.
I don't know if that holds true. I think there's probably some Saudis who quite like ISIS, but anyway.
Well, anyway, let's get into the article too much. But basically, they said that
people hate ISIS.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I'll be honest, I was under the impression that the Middle East and Saudi Arabia were very happy with ISIS because, neither of them seemed to take much of a stance against them.
Well, except the thing is that ISIS essentially makes exclusive claims that they alone are just the nature of their particular ideology is essentially they alone are the true heirs of Islam, and every Muslim in the world has an obligation to go to Iraq and join their group and submit to them. So it's really, to be perfectly honest, like a pissing competition between various extremist groups. That's why Al-Qaeda doesn't like them, is because essentially Al-Qaeda thinks they're top dog and ISIS think they're top dog, and not everybody can be top dog. So
literally translates to the base. So I can imagine. It makes it pretty obvious why they think they should be, submitted to.
So anyway, but
Anyway,
I actually don't have a huge problem with Russia getting involved. Syria was a long-term client state of the Soviets. The Russians have a base there. Even though the Russians are not actually fighting ISIS, they're fighting for Bashar al-Assad, who is a complete douchebag.
Mm.
Like, I still think it's better that countries that have a stake in the outcome actually get involved, as opposed to the US and the West, who don't have a stake. And certainly by using drones, there won't be any sort of meaningful feedback into those actions. You know, if they do something stupid, there's nothing that's going to necessarily blow back onto the US, apart from sort of general hatred towards them. So I actually really welcome Putin getting involved, even though I don't like Putin and even though I don't like Bashar al-Assad.
He's putting the boot in.
What I will say is American foreign policy is a product of electoral outcomes, and it is largely a product of the popular views of the American people. So, I mean, as a result, obviously not every American wakes up late at night and thinks about Syria, but there are strong undercurrents of public opinion leaning one way to the other, and American politicians have to take account of them. And those undercurrents lean towards intervention, and that's the reality. That's what I'm saying there. I think the contrast is that in Russia, politicians don't really take account of public opinion as much. They take account more of their own perceived class interests as politicians and bureaucrats. So, for them,
they've just got a very different set of incentives because it's an authoritarian regime. So,
exactly.
yeah.
But that means that they actually have, in some ways, a clearer view of their own self-interest than the shifting priorities of the day for Americans. And they actually understand that this is how most other countries work in the Middle East. So I think, at least in those two specific ways, they've got an upper hand over the Americans. That being said, nobody knows the Middle East. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the Middle East. And even the people in the Middle East don't know what's going to happen in the Middle East. It's an extraordinarily unpredictable world. The mere fact that the Russians are now helping the Syrians does not mean that the Russians will win, does not mean that ISIS will be wiped out, does not mean that Bashar al-Assad will take power again. Those things are now a little more likely than they're more likely than they were before, but it really doesn't mean that victory is inevitable.
No, well, I mean, ultimately, what this is about ideas, and ISIS is really part of an ongoing issue in that area, which is that, you know, there's different racial groups that have different objectives, and ISIS is appealing to one of them. Essentially, you know, Iraq has a government of one sect, then you've got the Kurds who are of a different sect, and then you've got kind of this, I think it's Sunnis? I think it's the Sunnis in that area, like they don't feel they've been represented by the Shia Iraqi government, so there's, you know, popular support for ISIS. You know, ISIS will go away when the popular support dries up. So obviously there will be an ongoing issue as long as there is, or there'll be popular support for groups like them. So it's maybe not specifically ISIS, but there'll always be those groups because there's a constituency for those groups.
Yeah, and it's not so much popular support as it is you're Sunni, we're Sunni, we can tolerate you, as opposed to feeling like an underclass amongst others, if that makes sense.
Yeah. For them, it's the least worst of a bunch of bad options. Which is, I mean, pretty much sums up the entire situation. Like, who's worse, ISIS or Bashar al-Assad? Well, they're all pretty wretched, exactly. You know. Do you really want the Russians getting involved? Well, they're not great either, you know. And most of the groups are against both...
Acid, or do I shoot myself in the head?
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't know why, but this entire conversation is making me want to watch Homeland.
Okay.
This is the thing, though, and one of the things I do want to say is the idea that the Americans are intervening for moral reasons. Bashar al-Assad is an awful, awful person, and the Syrian Ba'ath regime has massacred tens of thousands of people. No, they don't crucify people, but they massacre like hell, and a massacre is a massacre in my eyes.
Yeah.
So I don't see any moral distinction between them. I'll grant you that people who tolerate the Ba'ath are probably likely to lead somewhat better lives than people who tolerate ISIS, slightly. I'll grant you that.
Yeah.
But there's some. They are incredible murderers, and the idea that helping them, or helping these militia groups for that matter, is moral or just, to me, it's a total furphy. Anyway.
I mean, I guess what we've seen in both Libya and Iraq, as a result of U.S. intervention, is that there's actually some things worse than corrupt Middle Eastern dictatorships, and that is, I mean, you look at Libya and it's complete chaos.
Yeah.
You know, would Gaddafi be better than that? Yeah, probably. Does that make Gaddafi a good guy? No. Would Iraq be better if Saddam Hussein was still there? Probably. You know, I guess it's the fact. I mean, this is the great failure of U.S. foreign policy, and it's the same in Afghanistan. Really, is they think they can control a situation that they can't. You know, they go in and say, well, this is what we want the outcome to be. So they start blowing things up and they start, you know, installing governments and all this sort of stuff. And what we've seen repeatedly in the Middle East, I mean, this is not just, I guess, recent years. That you think about the Shah in Iran is, I guess, one of the truly colossal mistakes of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. And you say, well, you know, you can't control these things. You can't control people's lives. You can't control countries. It's not how it works. It's an entirely organic situation, and it's all bottom up. You know, it's no top down solutions to this. But yet,
I legitimately feel Kissinger would disagree with you.
Okay.
Kissinger is wrong as many times as he's been right.
Yeah, I mean, I think history has borne out the reality of unintended consequences, and Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. You know, and I guess, well, maybe in Syria as well. I guess we get to see what happens. But, you know, you can't control. The US thinks it can control the world, and it can't. And it should stop trying to do it because it just, in the case of Libya and arguably Iraq, it's created a worse situation.
Particularly because the US does it to meet electoral concerns in large part. It's just like, I mean, how do we play off this issue as good to the public?
Yeah.
How do we look good in the media today? It doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat. It's just about virtue signaling for the most part, and you know, that's an awful way to conduct policy.
I mean, like, I actually don't think that necessarily the politicians, be it George Bush, be it Barack Obama, be it all their neocon cronies.
Actually, to be perfectly honest, I actually think it does matter. So, the U.S. military has been far more vicious, far more vindictive, and quite frankly, if you take a look at the leaks that came out on WikiLeaks, all of this, you take the worst stuff that happened during Bush, right? I'm talking like Abu Ghraib, I'm talking, you know, like various journalist killings and like that. Obama's bombed two
hospitals.
Doctors Without Borders hospitals, countless drone strikes. They're saying that they can verify less than 10% of the targets. As being hitting high value targets from the drone strikes.
That pales in comparison to launching two full scale wars, but
I'd say it's probably worse, seeing as they're killing far more civilians now than they were under those two full scale wars. I have a lot more faith in precision military activities run by a large number of soldiers than a small force of drones with no verification of kills. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, didn't like 100,000 civilians die during the occupation of Iraq? Like,
yeah.
I mean, having said that, a lot of this civilian casualties was as a result of Iraqis killing Iraqis. Like, it wasn't.
Yeah, I would say that's not entirely fair. That's Iraqis killing Iraqis, and a lot of it is from the breakdown of law and order. It's not U.S. soldiers killing them. The U.S. soldiers killing civilians was actually really, really low, as it is with basically all military engagements by modern military services.
I mean, I'd say that's a distinction without a difference, to be honest. But I don't think that's neither here nor there. Like, I think we can sort of agree to disagree. I mean, I think part of it, the problem is that all these U.S. officials are probably well-intentioned. That is, I don't think Barack Obama sits around thinking, Let me think. How can I murder a bunch of Pakistani children this week? You know, like he's not. You know, how can I bomb Doctors Without Borders? Like it's not intentional. It's just if what happens is the incentives to get these things right are not there. You know, and I think that's part of the issue is that. And also part of the issue in convincing the public that this is a bad idea is we need to sort of point out that intentions don't matter. Outcomes are the only things that matters in these circumstances. And the outcomes that we've seen as a result of US military action are bad outcomes. You know, and the US needs to stop. And we also need to convince people that bad things are going to happen in the world and you can't stop them. I mean, that's ultimately this situation in Syria. It's a bad situation. Like there's almost no good outcome. It's almost all bad actors. And you just need to leave that be because you can't fix it. And I don't think people truly believe that they can't fix it.
Exactly.
And on that note, seeing as we're not going to be able to fix the Syria situation, I think we should call it an end to this episode. Seeing as we're back now to our 30-minute time zone. So I guess that's it for this week, and we'll catch everyone again next week. Bye.
Wait.
Bye.